I did not go to meet my fiancé's family to impress them. I went there to confirm something I had been quietly suspecting for months, something about him, about them, and about the kind of future I was stepping into without fully seeing it. By the end of that night, I would learn that the engagement I was walking toward was not built on love alone, but on plans, calculations, and a role they had already assigned to me without my consent. My name is Lena. I was 32 years old when this story began, and for most people in my life, I appeared ordinary. I dressed simply, lived modestly, and never spoke about money or ambition unless asked directly. My fiancé, Daniel, believed I worked a basic office job in a small tech-related department. He believed I struggled with rent sometimes. He believed I was grateful for stability. None of those beliefs were things I had ever clearly stated. He assumed them, and I never corrected him. Daniel came from a family that valued appearances more than people. His parents owned several businesses tied to automotive sales and regional partnerships, and they were well known in their social circle. They hosted charity dinners, attended exclusive events, and spoke often about legacy and reputation. Daniel warned me that his mother was particular and that first impressions mattered to her more than anything else. He said it casually, as if it were harmless. I took note of it. When he invited me to dinner at their home and hinted that it might lead to an engagement, I made a deliberate choice. I would go exactly as they expected me to be. No expensive clothes, no explanations, no attempts to prove myself. I wanted to see how they treated a woman they believed had nothing to offer them. I wanted to see how Daniel reacted when I was quietly disrespected. I wanted to see what kind of family I was being asked to marry into. That evening, I drove my old car to their estate, aware of how out of place it looked against the polished gates and long driveway. I noticed the pause at the door when they saw me, the quick looks, the brief silence before polite words followed. His mother smiled without warmth. His sister barely acknowledged me. Daniel stood beside me, tense, already trying to balance two worlds. At that moment, I did not yet know about the conversations that would happen behind closed doors, the plans that had already been made, or the role I was meant to play without ever being told. I only knew that this dinner was not just a meeting. It was the beginning of something much larger, and once I stepped inside that house, there would be no way to walk out unchanged. Dinner began almost immediately, as if they wanted to move past introductions before I had time to settle. We sat at a long table, and within minutes I understood that the meal was not about welcoming me. It was about measuring me. Daniel's mother asked questions that sounded polite but were shaped to place me somewhere specific in her mind: where I lived, how long my commute was, whether I lived alone. Each answer I gave seemed to confirm something she had already decided. His sister watched quietly at first, then joined in with sharper remarks. She spoke about vacations, investments, people I had never met, then paused to ask me what I liked to do on weekends, smiling as if she already knew the answer would disappoint her. When I said I enjoyed quiet things, she laughed lightly and turned to her mother, as if I were not sitting there. Daniel shifted in his chair but said nothing. The conversation slowly moved toward Daniel's past. His mother mentioned his previous relationship as if it were common knowledge I should be grateful to hear about. She spoke about the woman's education, her family connections, and how well she fit into their world. Daniel stared at his plate. I watched him closely. He did not correct her. He did not stop her. He allowed the comparison to stand. At one point, his mother asked what exactly I did at work. I repeated what I had always said. I worked in tech. I supported teams. She nodded with clear satisfaction and said every company needed people like that. People who helped others succeed. The way she said it made the sentence smaller than it sounded. Daniel glanced at me briefly, then looked away. Later in the evening, his father attempted to change the subject, asking me about my family. When I mentioned being raised by one relative, his sister reacted with visible curiosity, then said something about how difficult it must be to grow up without strong guidance. The words were smooth, but the message was clear. I was lacking something they valued. As the meal continued, the tone shifted from polite distance to quiet exclusion. Conversations happened over my shoulder. Plans were discussed without including me. Daniel remained present but distant, as if he were afraid of choosing the wrong side. I realized then that this was not accidental. This was how they tested people. Not directly, but by watching who tolerated being diminished. Near the end of dinner, Daniel's mother excused herself, followed shortly by his sister. The room felt suddenly lighter. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A few minutes later, as I walked down the hallway looking for the bathroom, I heard their voices behind a partially closed door. They were not speaking softly. They were speaking confidently, and they were speaking about me. I stopped without meaning to. What I heard next would change everything. I stood still in that hallway because my name was spoken with certainty, not curiosity. Daniel's mother was saying that this situation had gone on long enough and that it was becoming inconvenient. His sister replied that she had expected this phase to end weeks ago, that Daniel had been careless by bringing me into their home at all. They spoke as if I were an object left in the wrong place, something that needed to be moved quietly before it caused problems. I listened as they discussed timing. His mother said this was a sensitive period and that the family could not afford distractions. His sister reminded her that Daniel had responsibilities, that certain expectations had already been set with other people. She mentioned a name I had heard at the table, the woman they kept praising, the one who fit. She said that woman was still waiting and that it would be foolish to lose her patience. His mother agreed. She said Daniel had been warned not to let emotions interfere. She said I was supposed to be temporary, someone harmless, someone who would not ask questions or expect permanence. She said I was useful only because I kept Daniel occupied while more important matters were arranged. The word she used was placeholder. I felt my hands tighten, but I did not move. His sister laughed and said I looked exactly like the type. Quiet, grateful, easy to manage. She said I would probably accept whatever explanation Daniel gave when the time came. His mother said that if I didn't, they would make sure I left quietly. She said people like me never wanted trouble. They just wanted to belong. There was no anger in their voices, no hesitation. This was not gossip, it was planning. They spoke about my future as if it were already decided. They spoke about Daniel as if he were a tool they controlled. And they spoke about me as if I were too small to notice any of it. I stepped away from the door before they could open it. I walked into the bathroom, locked it, and stood there without turning on the light. My heart was steady. My thoughts were clear. What surprised me most was not what they had said, but how calm I felt hearing it. Something had settled into place. When I returned to the sitting room, Daniel looked at me and asked if I was all right. His voice sounded rehearsed. I said I was fine. He smiled with visible relief. A few minutes later, his mother returned and announced coffee as if nothing had happened. The night continued smoothly. Too smoothly. As we were leaving, Daniel squeezed my hand and told me his family would warm up to me with time. I nodded and said I understood. He kissed my forehead, proud of how easy I was making this for him. That night, driving home, I realized something important. I had come to observe his family, but I had learned more about Daniel than I ever expected. He was not unaware. He was participating, and he believed I was exactly who his family said I was. They were wrong. After that night, everything moved faster, but not in a way that felt natural. Daniel began talking about the future with an urgency he had never shown before. He spoke about timelines, about making things official, about how his parents expected clarity. He said it as if it were concern for us, but I could hear the pressure beneath his words. I agreed with him easily. I did not question anything. That seemed to calm him. Over the next few days, his mother started calling more often. Not to get to know me, but to manage me. She asked where I shopped, how flexible my work schedule was, whether I would be willing to relocate if needed. She spoke about family expectations and sacrifice, always framed as advice. Each call felt like a reminder that I was being evaluated for usefulness, not welcomed as a person. Daniel told me his family was under stress. He said business was complicated right now. He said his mother was worried about stability and image. When I asked what that meant, he said it wasn't something I needed to think about. He said he would handle it. That sentence stayed with me. He would handle it, as if my life was part of a problem to be managed. One evening, while we were together, his phone kept lighting up. He ignored it at first, then stepped away to answer. When he came back, he said it was nothing. I did not ask who it was. I already knew the name. It was the same name his family spoke with respect and expectation, the same name connected to their plans. A few days later, Daniel told me his parents wanted to host another dinner, something smaller, just family. He said it would help them accept the engagement. The way he said engagement caught my attention. He had not proposed. Yet the word was already being used. I realized then that the decision had been made without me. I was expected to follow. That night, Daniel finally did propose. It was sudden and public enough that refusing would raise questions. His parents were present. His sister watched carefully. I saw anticipation in their faces, not joy. This was not about love. This was about locking something in place. I said yes. The relief in the room was immediate. His mother smiled for the first time without effort. His sister congratulated me with practiced enthusiasm. Daniel looked proud, not because he was engaged, but because he had done what was expected of him. Later, when we were alone, Daniel asked if I was happy. I told him I was. He believed me. That was his mistake. Because while they thought they had secured me, I had secured something else. Time, access, and the freedom to see everything clearly. Once the engagement was announced, the tone around me changed, but not in the way Daniel had promised. His family no longer tested me openly. They assumed the test was over and that I had passed by being quiet and compliant. What followed was worse. They began speaking freely around me, as if I were already absorbed into the background of their plans. Daniel's mother started including me in conversations that were never meant for me to influence. She spoke about introductions I would need to make, events I would attend, and people I would need to impress. She talked about how important it was that I not say the wrong thing or appear confusing to the wrong people. I understood what she meant. I was expected to be invisible when it mattered and present only when it benefited them. His sister became less careful. She spoke openly about Daniel's past relationship, no longer pretending it was casual history. She mentioned meetings, favors, and old connections that were still useful. She said it in front of Daniel, watching his reaction. He never denied it. He never corrected her. He only glanced at me to see if I was paying attention. I was. One evening, Daniel told me he needed to attend a business dinner alone. He said it was sensitive and involved people who preferred privacy. He promised it was nothing personal. I smiled and told him I understood. Later that night, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was brief. It asked if Daniel was with me. It ended with a name, the same one. I did not reply. The next day, his mother called and reminded me that the engagement party would be important. She said certain announcements might be made. She said it would be best if I listened more than I spoke. She laughed lightly, as if it were advice given in kindness. That same afternoon, I started looking into things I had previously ignored, not out of jealousy, out of necessity. I looked at business records, public filings, news articles that mentioned Daniel's family only in passing. Patterns began to appear, missed obligations, quiet restructurings, partnerships that seemed urgent rather than strategic. That evening, Daniel asked if anything was wrong. I said no. I told him I was excited about the future. He relaxed immediately. He always relaxed when I said what he needed to hear. By then, I knew I was not standing in the way of their plans. I was part of them, just not in the role they thought. And I was done pretending I didn't see it. The confirmation came sooner than I expected. It happened on an ordinary evening when Daniel told me he would be late again. He said there was a meeting that could not be moved. His voice was calm, practiced, and familiar. I told him to take his time. After we hung up, I did not stay home. I went to the place he mentioned. I did not rush. I did not feel angry. I wanted certainty, not emotion. Through the glass, I saw him seated across from her. There was no distance between them. No tension. Whatever story he had told me about the past, it had not ended. It had only been paused. They spoke closely. At one point, she reached for his hand. He did not pull away. Later, he leaned in and said something that made her smile. I stayed long enough to see what I needed, then I left before either of them noticed me. That night, I did not confront him. I did not cry. I added what I had seen to everything I already knew. The engagement was not a commitment. It was a cover. He was keeping both paths open, just as his family intended. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to details Daniel never thought mattered. Calls he stepped away to take, meetings that did not align, small changes in tone when certain names were mentioned. The pattern was consistent. He was careful but not careful enough. At the same time, I continued my research. I focused on one thing his family never discussed openly: their finances. The public information was not hard to find once I knew where to look. Loans that had been restructured quietly, agreements that were close to expiring, dependencies they pretended did not exist. Their confidence was not strength, it was urgency. One name kept appearing: a business associate who had once been close to Daniel's father but no longer was. Someone who had stepped away under unclear circumstances. I reached out carefully. I did not explain everything. I did not need to. He already knew more than I expected. He listened. Then he asked one question. He asked whether I was sure I wanted to see this through. I said yes. I said I had already been placed inside the situation without my consent. I was simply choosing how it would end. He told me he had documentation. Not illegal, but damaging. Patterns that showed how Daniel's family handled people when they believed they had power. He said he had been waiting for the right moment to use it. He said timing mattered. That was when I understood something important. I was not alone in this story. I was just the one they underestimated most. From that point on, I stopped reacting and started planning. I continued behaving exactly as they expected. I attended dinners. I smiled at comments that were meant to reduce me. I agreed when Daniel spoke about timelines and arrangements. The more agreeable I became, the more careless they grew. Daniel's mother began speaking openly about how the engagement would help stabilize things. She never explained what things meant, but she didn't need to. I could hear the pressure behind every sentence. She talked about partnerships that required reassurance and people who needed to see commitment. She said my presence was important now, not because of who I was, but because of what I represented. Daniel, meanwhile, grew more distracted. He was present physically, but his attention was divided. When he thought I wasn't listening, he took calls in another room. When he thought I didn't notice, he smiled at messages that had nothing to do with me. At night, he spoke about the future in vague terms, as if repeating lines he had memorized rather than decisions he had made. One evening, I asked him directly if there was anything he needed to tell me before we moved forward. I kept my voice calm. I gave him space to be honest. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head and said no. He said everything was fine. He said I was overthinking things. That answer settled it. After that, information came quickly. The business associate I had contacted shared more than I expected. He showed me records that explained why the family was rushing the engagement, why certain names kept appearing, why Daniel's past relationship was never truly in the past. There were debts that needed covering. Deals that required trust from the outside. Appearances that had to be maintained at all costs. And Daniel knew. He wasn't being dragged along by his family. He was cooperating. He was benefiting. The engagement was not protection for me, it was protection for him. When the engagement party was officially announced, his mother treated it like an event that would solve multiple problems at once. She invited people who mattered, people who asked the right questions, people whose opinions could change outcomes. They believed the story was already writ. They did not realize I had read the entire draft. By the time the engagement party was confirmed, I understood the role I had been given. I was meant to stand beside Daniel, look supportive, and say nothing that disrupted the image his family needed to present. I was not expected to ask questions. I was not expected to notice patterns. Most importantly, I was not expected to act. That assumption worked in my favor. I told Daniel I was excited about the party. I asked his mother if she needed help with preparations. I listened carefully when his sister spoke about guest lists and seating arrangements. Every detail revealed something. Certain names were placed carefully. Certain people were given priority. This was not a celebration, it was a strategic gathering. At the same time, I continued collecting information quietly. Not speculation, not emotion. Facts, timelines, connections. I learned which partnerships were at risk and which people were being misled. I learned how close the family was to losing control of things they pretended were stable. And I learned how much depended on Daniel appearing settled and reliable. Daniel sensed nothing. When he looked at me, he saw someone who had accepted her place. That made him comfortable. He spoke more freely. He complained about pressure. He hinted at sacrifices he was making. Never once did he acknowledge what he was taking from me. A few nights before the party, I gave him one final chance. I asked him if he was sure there were no complications we should discuss before committing publicly. He laughed lightly and told me I worried too much. He said everything would make sense soon. That answer told me he had no intention of telling the truth. The day of the party arrived, and with it, the certainty that there would be no turning back. His family believed this event would secure their future. Daniel believed it would resolve his problems. They all believed I would stand quietly and let it happen. They were wrong. I did not plan chaos. I planned clarity. I planned to let people see exactly what they were standing on, not through emotion, through exposure. When I left for the party, I did not feel nervous. I felt focused. Everything I needed was already in motion. Every assumption they had made about me was about to work against them. And they had invited all the witnesses themselves. The engagement party began exactly as they wanted it to. People arrived in steady waves, greeting Daniel's parents with confidence and expectation. Conversations formed quickly, and I noticed how often business slipped into celebration. Questions were asked that had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with reassurance. Daniel's family needed people to believe in continuity. When Daniel found me, he looked relieved. He told me everything was going perfectly. He said his parents were pleased. He said this night mattered. I told him I knew it did. He did not hear the difference in my tone. As the evening moved forward, I watched how information traveled. Whispers moved faster than speeches. People noticed what they were not meant to notice. Some looked at me longer than necessary. Some asked careful questions. When I answered them honestly, without explanation or exaggeration, their reactions changed. Small pauses, raised eyebrows, quiet recalculations. Daniel's mother noticed it too. She began staying closer to me, inserting herself into conversations, steering them away when she felt control slipping. She smiled constantly, but her eyes kept searching. His sister became restless. She checked her phone repeatedly. She spoke sharply to Daniel when she thought no one was listening. At one point, Daniel pulled me aside and asked what I had been saying to people. I told him nothing unusual. I said I was just being myself. He studied my face, uncertain, then let it go. He always let it go. Later, I saw the woman they had never stopped talking about. She arrived quietly, greeted warmly, and was brought directly into Daniel's mother's circle. No introduction was made to me. No explanation was offered. She belonged here, that was the message. Daniel noticed her too. I saw the hesitation before he walked toward her. I saw the way he looked back at me, as if checking whether I was watching. I was. The room shifted after that. Conversations tightened. Laughter sounded forced. Something had changed, even if no one named it. I could feel the moment stretching, waiting. Then Daniel's father tapped his glass and called for attention. He spoke about family, about trust, about the future. He spoke about unity. His mother followed, smiling, building toward something she believed would seal the night. She invited Daniel forward. Then she invited me. When she handed me the microphone, she expected gratitude. She expected compliance. She expected a performance that would reassure everyone in the room. Instead, I looked out at the faces. They had carefully gathered and understood that this was no longer just their event. It was my moment to decide how the story would be told. I took the microphone without hesitation. For a brief second, no one spoke. They were waiting for the right words, the expected words. The kind that confirmed everything they wanted to believe. I did not rush. Silence did more work than speech ever could. I began by thanking Daniel's parents for organizing the evening. I kept my voice steady. I spoke clearly. I said it was impressive to see so many people gathered for one purpose. I watched Daniel's mother relax slightly. This was the direction she expected. Then I shifted. I said it was important for everyone to understand what this engagement truly represented. Not emotionally, but practically. I said I believed honesty mattered more than appearances, especially when so many people here were connected through business, trust, and long-term commitments. The room grew quiet again. I felt Daniel stiffen beside me. I mentioned that before agreeing to marry into this family, I had taken time to understand the situation I was stepping into. I said I believed informed decisions were better than blind ones. I said that over the past few weeks, I had learned things that deserved to be acknowledged openly rather than hidden behind celebration. Daniel's mother's smile tightened. His sister stopped moving. I said I had learned that this engagement was not just about Daniel and me. It was tied to expectations that had existed long before I arrived. Expectations involving past relationships that were never truly closed. I paused and looked directly at Daniel. He did not look back. I said I had learned that this family was facing pressures they had not shared publicly. That stability was being projected while urgency was being managed privately. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I stated facts carefully, letting people draw their own conclusions. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Some looked toward Daniel's parents, others checked their phones. I said there was more. I said I had been treated as temporary, as someone who would not question arrangements made without her. I said that assumption had been a mistake. Daniel reached for my arm. I stepped slightly away. I said that anyone here who valued transparency should reconsider what they were celebrating. Because what was presented as a union was, in truth, a strategy. The silence that followed was not confusion, it was recognition. And then, I said the one thing they had never prepared for. I said I was stepping away from the engagement. Gasps broke out immediately. Daniel's mother spoke sharply, telling me this was not the time. Daniel whispered my name, panic clear in his voice. I handed the microphone back calmly. I told them this was exactly the time. The reaction was immediate, but uneven. Some people stood frozen, unsure whether this was conflict or performance. Others began whispering, connecting pieces they had already noticed but not questioned. Daniel's mother stepped forward and tried to take control, saying there had been a misunderstanding and that emotions were running high. Her voice was firm, but it lacked certainty. She was reacting, not leading. Daniel tried to speak to me quietly, asking me to stop, telling me we could talk later. I told him there was nothing left to discuss privately. I said anything important should be said where everyone could hear it. That was when his expression changed from panic to fear. I turned back to the room and said I had not come to create a scene. I said I had come to correct a story that had been told without my consent. I said that for weeks, I had been treated as a temporary solution while other arrangements continued in parallel. I said that was not a misunderstanding. It was a plan. Someone near the front asked what I meant by arrangements. I answered calmly. I said Daniel had maintained contact with a former partner whose presence was still central to his family's expectations. I said this was known and accepted by his parents. I said the engagement was meant to buy time and reassure people in this room. Daniel denied it immediately. He said that was not true. His voice shook as he spoke. I looked at him and said I had seen enough to know better. I said denial did not change behavior. At that moment, a man I had spoken to earlier stepped forward. He did not address me. He addressed Daniel's father. He asked whether the family wanted to explain the financial pressures behind this engagement before more questions were asked. The shift in attention was sharp. Daniel's father said nothing. His silence answered more than words could. I said there was one more thing people deserved to know. I said while I had been positioned as insignificant, I had access to information others did not. I said certain partnerships mentioned tonight were already unstable, not because of market conditions, but because of internal decisions. Daniel's sister shouted that this was inappropriate. She said I was attacking their family. I said I was describing it. Then another voice spoke. Someone confirmed what I had said, then another. The room fractured into overlapping conversations. Phones came out. Messages were sent. The event Daniel's family had designed to secure confidence was unraveling in real time. Daniel stood beside me, completely exposed. Not because I raised my voice, but because I stopped protecting him. And that was only the beginning. Once the room broke into fragments, control disappeared completely. Daniel's mother tried to gather people back together, insisting that business discussions had no place at a family event. But the problem was that this event had never been only about family. Everyone there understood that now. A woman near the center of the room asked Daniel directly whether he was still involved with his former partner. The question was simple. It required a simple answer. Daniel hesitated. That hesitation did more damage than any accusation I could have made. He finally said it was complicated. That word ended what little credibility he had left. Another guest asked why certain financial commitments mentioned earlier had not been disclosed properly. Daniel's father attempted to respond, but his explanation lacked clarity. He spoke about timing and negotiations, about things being in progress. The words sounded defensive. People who dealt in agreements recognized that tone immediately. I said nothing during this exchange. I did not need to. The story was now moving on its own. What I had introduced was no longer personal. It had become structural. Daniel stepped closer to me and asked quietly why I was doing this. He said we could fix things. He said he still cared about me. I looked at him and said that caring without honesty was just convenience. He had no answer for that. Someone else asked whether this engagement had been announced to influence upcoming decisions. Daniel's mother interrupted, saying the engagement was real and based on love. The room did not respond. Silence followed her statement, heavy and final. Then the woman they had all been protecting spoke. She said she had been told Daniel was free to choose, that this engagement was temporary, that no commitments were final yet. She said she had trusted that explanation. Her voice was steady, there was no anger in it, only realization. That was the moment Daniel broke. He tried to explain to both of us at once. He said he had been under pressure. He said his family needed time. He said he never thought it would go this far. Each sentence contradicted the one before it. People began leaving quietly, not dramatically, strategically. They had seen enough. They did not want to be connected to whatever came next. Daniel's father sat down heavily, understanding what had been lost. His mother stood still, calculating damage control that no longer existed. Daniel looked between all of us, finally realizing that there was no version of this story where he remained untouched. I stepped away from him and said clearly that I was done. Not angry, not emotional, done. And for the first time that night, no one tried to stop me. I did not leave immediately. I stayed long enough to watch the consequences begin. Conversations that had once been polite became urgent. People who had arrived confident now spoke carefully, choosing words as if they might be quoted later. Daniel's parents moved separately, no longer acting as a unit. Each was trying to secure what mattered most to them. Daniel followed me at a distance, unsure whether to approach. When he finally did, he asked if we could talk somewhere private. I told him there was no private space left. Everything important had already been said. He said I was destroying years of work. I said he had done that himself long before I arrived. A few guests I recognized from earlier discussions asked me quiet questions. Not emotional ones, practical ones. They wanted confirmation of things they had suspected. I answered only what I knew for certain. That was enough. Their expressions told me they were already making calls. Daniel's sister tried to confront me, accusing me of planning this from the beginning. I did not deny it. I said I had planned to understand the truth. What they did with that truth was not my responsibility. She started to argue, then stopped when she realized people were listening. At that moment, Daniel's mother attempted one final correction. She announced that the engagement was being postponed due to personal reasons and asked everyone to respect the family's privacy. No one challenged her. No one agreed either. The phrase landed and dissolved immediately. I noticed that several people had already left, not out of shock, but out of calculation. They did not want to be associated with instability. They had seen it clearly now. Stability had been an illusion. Daniel stood beside me again and asked if there was any chance we could talk later. I looked at him and said there had been many chances. He had chosen each one carefully, just not in my favor. As I moved toward the exit, I saw Daniel's former partner standing alone. She looked at me, then nodded once. There was no anger in her face, only clarity. She turned and walked away before anyone could stop her. Outside, the noise from inside faded quickly. I did not look back. I knew what was happening behind me. Damage was being measured. Stories were being adjusted. Blame was being reassigned. But one thing could not be undone. The truth had been spoken where it mattered most. The days after the party were quieter than I expected. Not because nothing was happening, but because everything was happening out of sight. Calls were being made. Meetings were being canceled. Decisions were being reversed without announcements. I knew this because I started receiving messages from people I had met only once, asking careful questions framed as casual check-ins. Daniel called repeatedly. At first, his messages were apologetic, then they became urgent. Then defensive. He said his family was under pressure. He said people were misunderstanding the situation. He said I had taken things too far. I did not respond to any of it. Every message confirmed what I already knew. He was not upset about losing me. He was upset about losing control. A few days later, I learned that one of the partnerships discussed at the party had been paused. Officially, it was described as routine reassessment. Unofficially, people were distancing themselves. Trust had cracked, and no one wanted to be the last one standing near it. Daniel's mother called once. Her tone was different, controlled but careful. She said she wanted to clear the air. She said families made mistakes under pressure. She said public scenes helped no one. I told her I agreed. Then I said that private manipulation helped even fewer. She did not reply to that. Not long after, someone I trusted confirmed what I had suspected. Financial reviews were being requested. Quiet ones, not accusations, but questions that required answers. The kind that could not be brushed aside with charm or reputation. Daniel tried one last time to meet me. He said he needed closure. I said closure was not a conversation. It was a result. He asked if I had planned to expose everything. I told him no. I had planned to see who he was when honesty was required. He had shown me. What surprised me most was how quickly the narrative changed once I stopped participating. Without me present to absorb blame or confusion, attention turned inward. The story was no longer about a broken engagement. It was about credibility. I watched from a distance as the structure Daniel's family relied on began to weaken. Not dramatically, slowly, the most dangerous kind of collapse. And I knew it wasn't over yet. A week later, the first confirmation arrived without warning. An article appeared online, brief and carefully worded, mentioning delays in a major deal connected to Daniel's family business. No accusations were made. No names were criticized directly. But the language was cautious, the kind used when people were protecting themselves from something they did not want to be linked to. Daniel sent me the link within minutes. He asked if I had spoken to anyone. I did not reply. An hour later, he sent another message saying his father had been called into an unexpected meeting. He said people were acting strangely. I still said nothing. Soon after, someone who had attended the party contacted me privately. They said decisions were being reconsidered across the board, not just one partnership, several. They said confidence had been shaken, and once that happened, it was difficult to restore. They thanked me for being honest when others had chosen silence. I did not answer that either. Daniel's sister reached out next. Her message was sharp and unfocused. She accused me of setting traps. She said I had enjoyed humiliating them. I read it once and deleted it. The accusation didn't matter. The outcome did. Then Daniel finally said something different. He said his family had asked him to step back from certain responsibilities. Temporarily, he said, until things settled. He said they needed to show stability. I understood what that meant. He had become a liability. That same day, I learned that one of the reviews had gone further than expected. Questions were no longer informal. Documentation had been requested. Timelines were being examined. People who had stayed quiet for years were now being asked to explain why. Daniel asked if I felt satisfied. I told him this had never been about satisfaction. It had been about stopping a lie from continuing. He said he wished I had trusted him. I said trust required truth. After that, he stopped calling. What followed was not dramatic, it was controlled. People distanced themselves without announcements. Invitations stopped arriving. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. The family's name still existed, but its weight had changed. They had built their power on perception. Once that shifted, everything built on top of it became unstable. And they knew exactly when it started. The silence from Daniel lasted 3 days. Then he asked to meet. Not to talk about us, but to explain himself. That difference mattered. I agreed, not because I needed answers, but because I wanted to hear what he believed would still work. He arrived already defensive. He said things had spiraled out of control. He said his family was being unfairly targeted. He said I had given people the wrong impression. I let him speak until he ran out of sentences that avoided responsibility. Then I asked him one question. I asked him when he planned to tell me the truth. He looked confused and said he had always been honest. I asked him which version of his life he meant. The one he lived with me or the one he lived with everyone else. He said he had been under pressure. He said his family expected things from him that I wouldn't understand. He said the engagement was real, even if the timing had been influenced by other factors. I told him timing was not the problem, intent was. When I asked him about continuing contact with his former partner, he didn't deny it. He said it was complicated. He said she was important to the family. He said he was trying to keep everyone satisfied. I told him that keeping everyone satisfied meant lying to at least one person. He knew exactly who that had been. He asked if I had ever cared about him. I said I had. That was why I had waited. That was why I had given him chances to tell the truth before anyone else had to hear it. He looked away when I said that. Then he said something that finally ended it. He said if I had just waited, everything would have settled. He said the arrangement would have worked out. That was when I understood that he still did not see what he had done. He saw damage to his plans, not betrayal of trust. I told him I was done explaining myself. I told him that whatever happened next was no longer my concern. He asked if there was any way to fix this. I said some things only looked broken when the lie holding them together was removed. When we stood up to leave, he looked smaller than I remembered. Not because he had lost power, but because he had never actually held it himself. As I walked away, I knew this meeting was the last place where his version of the story could exist. After that, only facts remained. After that meeting, things moved quickly. Not publicly, but decisively. The questions that had started quietly were now being followed up with deadlines. Requests for clarification became requests for proof. The kind that required documents, not explanations. Daniel's father issued a short statement about restructuring. It was meant to sound proactive. People who understood the language knew it was reactive. Something had already gone wrong. The statement did not calm anyone. I received a message from someone involved in one of the delayed deals. They said the engagement party had forced conversations that should have happened years earlier. They said too many inconsistencies had been ignored because the family's reputation made people hesitate. That hesitation was gone now. Daniel tried once more to reach me, but this time his message was different. He said his family was under review. He said advisors had stepped in. He said mistakes were being uncovered that he had not known about. I read it carefully. Then I noticed what he did not say. He did not deny what I had revealed. He only tried to distance himself from it. Soon after, another development surfaced. A former associate came forward with concerns similar to the ones now being examined. The timing was not accidental. Once one person spoke, others felt safe enough to follow. That was how it always worked. Daniel's sister deactivated her social accounts. Invitations to events connected to the family were quietly withdrawn. People who had once praised them publicly now spoke about them only in private, choosing words carefully. I watched all of this without involvement. I had said what needed to be said. What followed belonged to those who had built their lives on silence and assumption. The last update I heard came through someone who had no reason to exaggerate. They said the family's internal review was no longer internal. They said external eyes were involved now. Neutral ones, the kind that did not care about names or history. Daniel sent one final message after that. He said he wished he had chosen differently. I did not respond. Wishing was not a choice. It was an admission that the choice had already been made. By then, the engagement felt like something that had happened in another life. What remained was not loss, but clarity. And the consequences were still unfolding. The confirmation came quietly, without announcements or confrontation. One morning, a contact I trusted sent me a short message. It said the review had escalated. It said certain records had not aligned. It said explanations were no longer sufficient. Later that day, another message arrived from someone else. They said a senior partner had withdrawn completely, not postponed. Withdrawn. The reason given was loss of confidence. That phrase appeared again and again, spoken by different people who had never spoken to each other. Confidence, once lost, could not be negotiated back. Daniel's family responded the only way they knew how. They denied nothing directly, but corrected everything vaguely. Statements were issued that said nothing while sounding official. Advisors were hired to manage perception. Meetings were held to assess damage rather than responsibility. Daniel called again. His voice was flat. He said the engagement was officially over. He said his parents thought it would help separate personal issues from business ones. I told him the separation had happened long ago. He asked if I felt relieved. I said relief was not the word, resolution was. That evening, I learned something else. One of the internal findings had been referred forward, not as an accusation, but as a concern that required independent review. That distinction mattered. It meant the matter was no longer contained. It meant outcomes would no longer be decided by reputation. Daniel's mother tried once more to reach me. She left a message asking for a conversation, not to argue, not to explain, to close things properly. I did not return the call. Closure had already happened. It just had not been on her terms. What struck me most was how quickly the family's certainty collapsed once they could no longer control the narrative. They had always believed problems could be managed privately. They had never planned for visibility. People who once avoided asking questions now asked them freely. People who once relied on assurances now demanded verification. The shift was irreversible. I realized then that the most powerful thing I had done was not exposing a secret. It was refusing to protect one. And the story still wasn't finished. The final break came without drama, no arguments, no last attempts to explain. Daniel sent a short message confirming that the engagement had been formally canceled. He said it was mutual. He said it was best for everyone involved. I read it once and understood what it really meant. It was the last version of the story he could still control. By then, his family was no longer focused on me. Their attention had turned inward. What had started as damage control had become survival. Advisors replaced friends. Meetings replaced celebrations. Every decision was now measured against risk. I learned through others that Daniel had been removed from several discussions he once attended. Not officially dismissed, but quietly sidelined. He was no longer a representative. He was a reminder. His name had become attached to uncertainty, and uncertainty was something his family could not afford. The woman they had once positioned as the future stepped away completely. Not publicly. She simply stopped responding. Her absence spoke louder than any statement. The plan that had been carefully managed for years dissolved without explanation. Daniel tried to reach me one last time after that. He said he wanted to apologize properly. He said he finally understood what he had lost. I did not answer. Understanding after consequences was not understanding. It was recognition that there was nothing left to gain. Soon after, the first formal notice appeared. It was not sensational. It did not assign blame. It simply confirmed that certain operations were under review and that changes were expected. People who knew how to read between lines understood exactly what that meant. What followed was quiet withdrawal. Support vanished. Invitations stopped. Associations loosened. The family name remained, but its protection was gone. Without that protection, everything else was exposed to scrutiny. I realized then that the ending I had chosen was the only one that could not be rewritten. I had not asked for justice. I had not demanded apology. I had simply stepped aside and allowed reality to surface. The engagement was over. The illusion was gone. And whatever happened next would happen without me. I did not follow what happened next closely. I didn't need to. Information reached me anyway, the way it always does when something unravels quietly. A review became an investigation. An investigation became a series of findings that could no longer be handled internally. Each step was controlled, procedural, and final. Daniel's family stopped appearing together. His father withdrew from public roles. His mother disappeared from social events she once dominated. Their business reduced its presence without explanation. No one announced failure. It simply became visible through absence. Daniel never contacted me again after that. Not because he had nothing to say, but because there was nothing left that could change anything. The version of himself he had relied on no longer worked. Without the protection of his family's certainty, he had nothing solid to stand on. Weeks later, I received confirmation that certain agreements had been formally terminated. Not paused, terminated. The language was neutral, but the meaning was permanent. The structure they had built their future on was no longer viable. I expected to feel something strong when I heard that. Satisfaction, relief, vindication. I felt none of it. What I felt was distance. As if the entire situation had moved behind glass. I could see it clearly, but it no longer touched me. Life returned to its normal pace. Work continued. Days passed without interruption. No one asked me for statements. No one needed explanations. The story had already resolved itself where it mattered. Once, while scrolling through news without intent, I saw a brief mention of restructuring and leadership changes connected to Daniel's family. No names were highlighted. No past events referenced. It was written as if this outcome had been inevitable. Maybe it was. What I know for certain is this: I walked into that family believing I was being evaluated. I did not realize they were revealing themselves. They believed I would stay quiet because they thought silence was weakness. They mistook restraint for ignorance. I did not leave angry. I did not leave broken. I left informed. And that was enough. The story ended the moment I stopped carrying a role that was never meant to protect me. Everything after that was simply consequence catching up to intention. You have reached the end of the text.